For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 473 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 473, a bill to authorize the Every Word We Utter monument to establish a commemorative work in the District of Columbia and its environs and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse, and the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the measure under consideration.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Members, every word we utter, every act we perform, waft unto innumerable circles beyond. Those are the words of Elizabeth Stanton that inspired the movement for H.R. 473, which will create Washington, D.C.'s first outdoor statue memorializing the women's suffrage movement. Today, we have the opportunity to honor the diverse and multi-generational group of women who fought for decades to secure the right to vote. The bill is strongly bipartisan and, in accordance with the Commemorative Works Act, will cost nothing to the federal government. It received positive feedback from the National Capital Memorial Advisory Committee, and it passed the House Natural Resources Committee with bipartisan support in October. Leading women's organizations are in support of H.R. 473, including the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission and multiple chapters of the American Association of University Women, as well as the League of Women Voters. I'm honored to carry this legislation that recognizes and honors the suffragists' tireless efforts and the ripples of hope and civic progress that have happened over the generations. I urge your support for this common-sense tribute to our nation's history, and I would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Colorado reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This coming August 18th will mark the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, which, after a century of earnest protest, extended the right to vote to all women. Now, 40 years before that, a suffragette, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, wrote admiringly to Lucretia Mott. Lucretia Mott was born in 1793 during the Washington presidential administration. At the time that Elizabeth Cady Stanton wrote to her, she was in her 88th and final year of life. Mott was a Quaker, a major voice in the abolitionist movement, and later in the suffragette movement. Reflecting on her leadership in these just causes and the effect that it had on the entire nation, Elizabeth Cady Stanton said, "One who has lived 88 years, reflecting ever the sober virtues of the true wife and mother, the earnest reformer, the religious teacher, both in the schoolroom and friends' meetings, must have exerted a strong influence for good on our young, impressionable nation. When we remember that every word we utter, every act we perform in all our waking hours, the very atmosphere, the combination of all of our faculties, have their constant effect on every one who comes within the circle of our individual influence, and through them are wafted by word, by letter, and by thought to innumerable other circles beyond. When we try to estimate all this, we can, in a measure, appreciate the elevating influence on a nation of just one grand life." Well, the Every Word We Utter monument takes those words as a testament to the patient influence of so many who finally won adoption of the 19th Amendment, and with it, the fulfillment of American democracy. Those early suffragettes like Mott and Stanton never lived to see the culmination of their life's work, but the Every Word We Utter monument will assure that their example and their achievement is memorialized in Washington, D.C., as are all of the great men and women and all the great deeds that built this country, as Lincoln said, into the last best hope of mankind on this earth. This memorial, which will be built without use of federal funds, will serve as a lasting tribute to the brave and intelligent women who fought to secure voting rights for all Americans. I urge adoption of the measure and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague from California for his remarks and couldn't agree with him more and appreciate his support of this important bill. I have no further requests for time and am prepared to close.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'd yield such time as he may consume to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Tipton.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for such time as you may consume.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Last year marked the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment. And while I wish the House would have passed this bill last year to honor the centennial anniversary of the suffragettes' decades-long fight to be able to win the right to vote, I'm glad we're debating this bill now. The Every Word We Utter monument will serve as a continual reminder of the courage shown by women engaged in the suffrage movement, and we must all work to do what we can for the future, to be able to ensure equality and inclusion. I appreciate the opportunity to have worked with my colleagues from Colorado on this bill, and especially my colleague from the 2nd District, Mr. Neguse. I stood across him a few times on this floor, and it's nice to be in agreement on a public lands bill that we're able to work together on now. It's a bill to be able to help us to bring to light a loved sculptor, Jane Dedeker's work to Washington. I think an adequate effort to be able to help recognize the suffrage movement and the contribution of women to our nation. With that, I'd urge my colleagues to be able to support this bill.
Gentleman yields back.
And I'm prepared to close and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves.
The gentleman's ready to,
the gentleman reserves.
Then I'll yield,
gentleman from California
yield back.
reserves. The gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague and neighbor from the 3rd District for his very kind remarks and for his support of this bill, and my fellow members of the Colorado delegation for their unanimous support of this bill. Madam Speaker, I must take a moment to thank the advocates who have worked on this legislation for many years. Jane Dedeker, who is a constituent of mine in the wonderful community of Loveland, Colorado, who conceptualized the statute for which our bill is named. The president of the Every Word We Utter board, Jody Shattuck McNally, who also worked tirelessly. Both of these women have worked very hard to ensure that this piece of women's history and the long legacy of women's civic engagement that followed is commemorated effectively and can stand as an inspiration for generations to come. I would close just on a personal note. As the Speaker knows, my daughter Natalie is just a year and a half old now, and as she grows up, I want her to feel represented, empowered, and assured of the fundamental role that she plays in our society. And when Natalie visits our nation's capital, she will hopefully be able to visit this statue and learn of the great struggle to ensure her equality and be assured that America's sons and daughters stand on equal footing at the doors of opportunity. So in reverence to the brave women who fought for equality in the past, and on behalf of all of those who will follow, I want to thank my fellow members for their consideration and support of this legislation, and I would yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Colorado yields back. I take note that the gentleman from California yielded back as well. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 473 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.